Before there was streaming, before endless modern love stories filled our screens, there was one movie that rewrote what romance could feel like. In 1990, Pretty Woman gave the world Edward and Vivian, a pair who came from opposite sides of life yet found a love that felt both impossible and undeniable. Their story was more than a fairy tale. It was about transformation, chance, and the kind of connection that changes everything. When Pretty Woman first appeared in theaters in 1990, nobody expected it to become one of the most iconic romantic comedies of all time. At its heart was a love story between Edward Lewis, a wealthy businessman, and Vivian Ward, a woman whose life had never been easy, but whose spirit and laughter lit up every scene. Together, they created a romance that didn't just belong on the screen. It lived in the hearts of everyone who watched it. The world had seen love stories before, but nothing like this. Julia Roberts, with her unforgettable smile, and Richard Gere, with his quiet, commanding charm, made Edward and Vivian's connection feel magical yet real. It wasn't just about wealth meeting hardship or opposites attracting. It was about two people who saw beyond what the world told them they were supposed to be. Edward, who lived in a world of polished deals and empty relationships, found warmth and truth in Vivian. Vivian, who had been overlooked and underestimated, found someone who saw her for who she truly was. Audiences instantly felt something new. Here was a story that wasn't afraid to mix fantasy with reality. Vivian wasn't the typical princess, and Edward wasn't the typical prince. Yet together they created a modern-day fairy tale that was just as enchanting. The hotel lobby scenes, the sparkling shopping spree, the laughter that came from a simple jewelry box, all of these became cinematic treasures. People didn't just watch Pretty Woman, they returned to it again and again, because it reminded them of what it feels like to be seen, cherished, and loved against the odds. But beyond the glamour, the clothes, and the unforgettable soundtrack, the film carried a deeper message. It was about possibility. The idea that love can arrive in the most unexpected places, that people can change, and that everyone, no matter their past, deserves to be loved with kindness. This message was what kept Pretty Woman alive long after 1990. It played in late-night reruns, it became a VHS and DVD staple, and now, decades later, it is finding new audiences in theaters once again. For Edward and Vivian, every scene was more than entertainment. It was a window into longing, vulnerability, and the risk of opening yourself up to someone different. And for viewers, it was an escape into a world where happy endings weren't just for storybooks. When Edward climbed that fire escape at the end, roses in hand, it wasn't just a scene, it was a promise. A promise that love, in its truest form, doesn't care about wealth, status, or appearances. It only cares about two people who are brave enough to choose each other. That's why, even now, Pretty Woman is being celebrated once more. As the film returns to audiences today, Edward and Vivian remind us that the best love stories never fade. They live on, glowing just as brightly as the first time we saw them. And in every smile, every look, every laugh they share, we remember why Pretty Woman became more than a movie. It became a piece of our lives. The magic of Pretty Woman is not found in a single scene, but in the way Edward and Vivian's story unfolds moment by moment, slowly building into something unforgettable. Every frame between them carries a spark, sometimes playful, sometimes tender, always alive. These moments didn't just shape the movie, they became part of movie history. Think first of the scene with the jewelry box. Vivian reaches out to admire the necklace, and Edward, with a playful smirk, snaps the box shut. Startled, she bursts into laughter, the kind of genuine, unstoppable laugh that Julia Roberts turned into one of cinema's most iconic sounds. That moment wasn't scripted to perfection, it was real, raw, and full of the kind of charm that can't be planned. Audiences around the world didn't just see Vivian laugh, they fell in love with her because of it. And in that simple scene, we saw Edward fall too. Then there was the shopping spree, the Cinderella moment. Vivian walks into a boutique, no longer the woman who had been judged and turned away the day before. Instead, she is radiant, confident, glowing with new clothes and a new sense of self. But what made the moment powerful wasn't just the expensive dresses. It was the way Edward looked at her. Not as someone he had changed, but as someone who was finally stepping into the space she deserved all along. The world called it a makeover. Edward knew it was a revelation, and who could forget the opera? Edward takes Vivian to see La Traviata, and as the music rises, so do the emotions. Vivian's eyes glisten with tears, overwhelmed by the beauty of the performance, and perhaps by the beauty of the life she never thought she would glimpse. In that darkened theatre, surrounded by strangers, she feels both out of place and completely at home. Because Edward is beside her. For Edward, watching her, it's the moment he realizes that she doesn't just fit into his world, she makes it brighter, but no moment defined Pretty Woman more than the ending. The rooftop rescue. Edward, who had spent his life keeping everything under control, takes a risk. He arrives with roses in hand, climbing the fire escape like a knight with no armor. Vivian, who once believed fairy tales weren't for her, looks down and sees the impossible become real. It was the closing scene that sealed the film as a modern fairy tale. And when Edward says he came to rescue her, and Vivian replies, she rescues him right back, it wasn't just dialogue. It was the truth of their story. Love wasn't one-sided. It was equal. It was brave, and it changed both of them forever. These moments, played out in laughter, in longing glances, in risks taken, are why Edward and Vivian remain timeless. They were not perfect characters. Edward was guarded, controlled, afraid of being vulnerable. Vivian was underestimated, judged, and searching for a place to belong. But together, they brought out the best in one another. That is what audiences connected with then, and that is what still pulls us in today. It's no surprise that these scenes are remembered and replayed across generations. The jewelry box snap, the red dress on the staircase, the fire escape rescue. Each of them etched into cinematic memory, not because they were polished or glamorous, but because they were alive with feeling. They reminded us that love stories, no matter how unusual, are built not in grand gestures alone, but in the little sparks that make hearts race. And now, as Pretty Woman is celebrated again, these iconic moments rise to the surface once more, reminding us why Edward and Vivian remain one of cinema's most beloved couples. Their story is proof that sometimes, against all odds, fairy tales can find their place in the real world. For more than 3 decades, fans of Pretty Woman have held on to one thought: what happened after the fire escape? The movie ended with Edward and Vivian locked in each other's arms, but for many, that was only the beginning. Their story felt too big, too alive to stop there. And so the idea of a sequel, of a Pretty Woman 2, has always lingered in the air like a soft melody waiting to be finished. Imagine it, Edward and Vivian, years later, still together, still writing their love story. No longer strangers from opposite worlds, but partners who built a life side by side. Edward, who once lived only for business deals and money, might now find his joy not in boardrooms, but in moments with Vivian. Whether it's traveling together, building a home, or simply enjoying quiet mornings with coffee and laughter, Vivian, who once doubted she could belong in a world that judged her, would now be fully herself, strong, confident, and loved beyond measure. In Pretty Woman 2, we could see the couple navigating the real challenges of life beyond the fairy tale ending. How would they handle differences, disagreements, and the weight of expectations? How would they protect their love in a world that once tried to keep them apart? And perhaps, most importantly, how would they keep the magic alive after the credits rolled? The beauty of their story is that Edward and Vivian never needed perfection. What made them unforgettable was the way they saw each other as they truly were, flaws and all, and chose love anyway. Fans often imagine them walking together down city streets, hand in hand, no longer worried about who is watching. They picture Edward surprising Vivian with simple gestures. Flowers on a random day, tickets to a show, a look that says she's still the best part of his world. They picture Vivian lifting Edward out of the rigid cage of his old life, reminding him every day to laugh, to breathe, to live fully. Their sequel wouldn't be about money or transformation. It would be about love that lasted, about choosing each other again and again. And that is why people still dream of Pretty Woman 2. Because the original film didn't just tell a story, it planted a question in the hearts of its audience. What happens next? Most love stories on screen end with a kiss, a wedding, or a promise. But Edward and Vivian felt real enough that fans wanted to see more. They wanted to believe that their fairy tale didn't fade when the screen went dark. Of course, the sequel may never exist on film, but in the imagination of millions, it has already been written. Every fan who has watched Pretty Woman has carried Edward and Vivian beyond 1990, picturing them growing older, still laughing, still rescuing each other in ways both big and small. That in itself is the true legacy of the movie. It didn't end with an ending. It opened a door that has never really closed. So when we think of Pretty Woman 2, we are really thinking of the story that lives inside us. The desire to see love last, to believe that the fairy tale we fell in love with on screen can stretch into forever. Edward and Vivian remain timeless not only because of the movie they were in, but because of the life audiences have imagined for them ever since. Time has a way of changing everything. Cities grow taller, technology speeds ahead, and stories that once filled theatres are often left behind. But some love stories refuse to fade. Pretty Woman is one of them. More than 30 years after its release, the film is alive again, finding its way back onto the big screen for a new generation to experience. And when the lights dim and the first notes of the soundtrack begin, it feels as if no time has passed at all. Watching Edward and Vivian today, we see not only a movie, but a reflection of something deeper. Their story reminds us that love can break boundaries, that kindness matters, and that laughter can change the course of someone's life. Even now, audiences laugh at Vivian's infectious joy, they smile at Edward's slow transformation, and they hold their breath during the rooftop rescue. These moments may belong to 1990, but their power stretches far beyond. The re-release is more than nostalgia. It's proof that the themes of Pretty Woman, hope, transformation, and the belief that love can rewrite destiny still speak to us today. In a world that often feels uncertain, Edward and Vivian's romance offers comfort. It whispers that fairy tales don't only live in books or films, they can happen in real life too. All it takes is two people who are willing to see each other for who they truly are, and to hold on, even when the world tells them not to. As fans return to theatres, they are not just watching a movie, they are revisiting a memory, reliving the emotions that first made them believe in the power of love on screen. And for younger viewers, it is a chance to discover Edward and Vivian for the first time, to step into a story that shaped an entire era of romantic storytelling. The film becomes both past and present, reminding everyone that true love never goes out of style. And perhaps that is the real legacy of Pretty Woman. Not the money, not the clothes, not even the famous soundtrack, but the love that felt so real. It continues to live in our imaginations decades later. Edward and Vivian were never just characters. They became symbols of hope, proof that sometimes love arrives in the most unexpected places, and that when it does, it can change everything. As the credits roll once again, audiences leave theatres with the same glow they felt back in 1990. Some are smiling, some are remembering their own stories, and some are simply holding on to the dream that love like Edward and Vivian's is still possible. Because in the end, Pretty Woman isn't just about one couple. It's about all of us, our longings, our fears, our hopes for connection, and our belief in second chances. It began with a chance meeting. It grew with laughter, with trust, with courage. And more than 30 years later, it returns to remind us all of something simple but timeless. True love never fades. Edward and Vivian will always belong to each other and to us.